Hello again, book lovers, and this time I'm going to be commenting on The Origins of Virtue by Matt Ridley, an author I didn't know. He was recommended to me along the lines of, oh, you like evolutionary biology, Dan Dennett, Steven Pinker, Richard Dawkins, The Selfish Gene. We're on that kind of territory. And the author is Matt Ridley. As I say, I didn't know anything about him, so I looked him up. Firstly, I found a review of one of his books on a Guardian web page, and that's what decided me to buy it. I also learned that he is a Conservative peer sitting in the House of Lords. So there you go. His academic background is zoology at Oxford University and subsequently journalism. So, right. This is a nice polemical book. It takes in a lot of weighty thinkers. We're talking about Hobbes and Rousseau, Locke, etc. Knowing that he's from the conservative side, this is going to be a kind of conservative manifesto, and it is a book that presents an argument in several stages. I'll tell you what the conclusion is later. You have to listen to the end. And to preface the last chapter, we have a pair of quotes which kind of sum up the arguments, both sides, that is presented in this book. The first is from the Morning Post in January 1847. We do not suppose that the selfishness of human nature is ever to be overcome, but we would have the laws and institutions of society so framed as to give it all possible discountenance. That's a very reasonable sounding position, isn't it? But also in January 1847, The Economist snapped back. The Post probably imagines, because laws and institutions are intended to promote the public benefit, that they make society. But a different philosophy represents society as the natural product of the instincts of individuals. That's the argument that this book makes. Beginning with genetics, and right at the very beginning, Peter Kropotkin. So, Kropotkin, one of my favourite anarchist writers, was quoted because of his book Mutual Aid, where he argues that whereas our view of nature is each against all, red in tooth and claw, in fact we can see many examples of cooperation in nature. I expected this view to be rubbished immediately, but no, says Mr. Ridley. The big red-bearded anarchist is half right. I'm just going to interject here that Mr. Ridley is half right as well. He makes no mention of the second half of the book where Kropotkin talks about human societies and examples of cooperation in endeavour that would in any case back up Mr. Ridley's argument. By the way, if you're interested in the details of Kropotkin's phenomenal escape, I think the best place on the internet for that is my own short story, Cherry Stones, which you can find on the Dark Little Histories series on Charlie Taylor YouTube channel. So leaving that aside, we're going into the world of The Selfish Gene, The Origins of Virtue, the title of the book. What do we understand by virtue? Pretty much the opposite of selfishness. So the question is, to what extent is this an instinct? To what extent can it be imposed upon us by rules? I think you can guess Mr. Ridley's answer. And even if it can be imposed upon us, should it be imposed upon us? What is our real nature? So, great weighty topics. Again, one of these books where I have to reread certain paragraphs, make sure I've got it right. Luckily, I'm so old now that I know a lot of the arguments from previous philosophers and even more recent scientists, the late 20th century, for example. Beginning with the prisoner's dilemma, which is game theory. In this chapter, we investigate the various computer strategies that have been put forward as the best way to manipulate prisoner's dilemma type situations. Now, I found this fascinating. It's quite a good catch-up, and also I would say on Mr. Ridley's favour, he then analyses the results and gives us even more catch-up on, hey, just a minute, is it the same if you're allowed a 5-minute chat between participants or a 30-minute chat? Is it the same if you do it once or if you've done it every 2 weeks over 6 years, for example? You get to know your, in inverted commas, rivals. So we're taking a very fundamentalist approach, at least in terms of genetics. Each cell has the DNA encoded in it. We're talking about any plant, any animal, and that DNA, each cell has a goal. It's programmed to survive and replicate, and that's it. At the start of chapter 7 of this book, Theories of Moral Sentiments, subtitle, In Which Emotions Prevent Us Being Rational Fools, we find this quoted preface from Randolph Ness. And I think this is kind of at the nub of this. If you're interested in this question, you'd like this book. And here it goes. Well, it's not a question, it's a point of view. He says, the discovery that tendencies to altruism are shaped by benefits to genes is one of the most disturbing in the history of science. When I first grasped it, I slept badly for many nights, trying to find some alternative that did not so roughly challenge my sense of good and evil. Parentheses, yes, inherently we don't like this, do we? I mean, this isn't how we've understood the world. We're all programmed to do a certain way, and the only beneficiary at the end of the day will be our genes. Understanding this discovery, I continue, can undermine commitment to morality. It seems silly to restrain oneself if moral behaviour is just another strategy for advancing the interest of one's genes. Parentheses 2, going back to the start of it, these game theory, prisoner's dilemma, seems to be just reduced to a matter of how do you get through the maze to survival. And it doesn't matter what you call morality, goodness, badness. I resume the quote. Some students of Mr. Ness, I am embarrassed to say, have left my courses with a naive notion of the selfish gene theory that seemed to them to justify selfish behaviour, despite my best efforts to explain the naturalistic fallacy. So as you can see, it's a step-by-step progress towards the conclusion. Now, I can't go through it all. It's dense, it's entertaining, it's a page turner. One of the theories presented is that altruism in primates originated due to meat consumption, in that if you kill a large animal, you don't want to let it all go to waste, so you share it among the group, in theory, in hope of future recompense. It's notable, though, that in societies, and here this is the point, I think. And when I said that The Guardian criticised it, one of the words they used was waffle. I suspect what they mean by waffle is a lot of science and a lot of philosophy, because this all knits together into a theory which you may or may not disagree with. I'm a vegan, for example. It doesn't sit well with me that our altruistic tendencies came from killing animals for food. Not saying it's not the case. It's an interesting theory and shouldn't be rejected out of hand. Another theory which cropped up later as part of the same thread of argument, when he's after examining why we go to war, why we split ourselves into tribes, painting a pretty bleak picture of the Hobbesian war of each against all. The saving grace is, get this, trade, commerce. This was a bit of an eye-opener as well. I thought, well, I haven't really considered this. According to Mr. Ridley, there may have been commerce from hundreds of thousands of years before even the human species emerged. Possibly Homo erectus was swapping things over large distances. And this is the point, to the benefit of both. It's not a zero-sum game, hence the game theory at the beginning of this explanation. As another aside, I would say, while I was reading this book and seeing the world through the lens of genetics and biology, game strategies, human relations, cooperations, trust societies, enmities, etc. The two other books which I happened to be reading which will be the next up on the list, Malcolm X autobiography and a biography of Genghis Khan, suddenly made perfect sense, as did a situation that a friend of mine had at work. When you put the evolutionary biology goggles on, a lot of things seem to fall into place. But you don't have to wear them all the time, obviously. There is a fascinating excerpt about the fluctuations in silver and gold prices being caused by the Crusades, by the Christians into the Arab lands, which, I'm sad to say, I'd never heard of. So that was a little corner of history filled in for me and requires further research. But anyway, here we go. We've got a Conservative peer bigging up trade. No surprise. I'm taking it that he's an atheist. He's not coming from the religious corner of right-wing conservatism. He's coming from the Dawkins corner, and Dawkins, I'm not going to speak for him. I don't imagine him to be the least bit conservative. I may be wrong. If the names I've been talking about ring a bell, if you're interested in these kinds of really fundamental and essential arguments, which I still haven't made my mind up on, I'm kind of tempted to know what I don't believe rather than what I do believe. But in any case, this is a great book. I'll be reading more of this author. The Red Queen is his most successful book, and that talks about the origins of sexuality, I believe. Still, The Origins of Virtue. Challenging book. The Guardian didn't like it. You might.